You're listening to In Sickness, a podcast about caregiving with Allison Breininger and Justin Bima.
Hey, Justin.
Good morning, Allison. How are you doing this morning?
I'm so great because this time, for the first time, when I'm seeing your face, I have met you.
Right.
Since our last recording,
Yes.
You and I got to meet in person. So I get to see you on video when we get to do these recordings. And I have been in the room that you're sitting in right now. And it just is making me like cheesy grin because I feel like we got to meet and we got to spend time together. And it just makes me so happy.
Yeah, it was just an incredible experience to, after, knowing each other for years, in seeing each other in two dimensions on the screen at best, to be in the same space, to just have conversations, to meet your family.
Yeah.
It was just a really special time. And I know you were on a trip with your family out here, and that you made it a part of your trip to include us and meet us was just really meaningful. So
yeah. Oh my goodness. It just, So for listeners, here's what got to happen. So my mom and my daughter and my husband and I took a 10-day trip to Washington State. And a big part of it was we're going to go, we got to go see Justin and Sarah. It's got to happen. And just side note, and we can talk about this later, but just taking a trip at all, huge deal. Right. Huge deal. But so we came to your house and you all made the loveliest dinner. It was my mom's birthday, and just made it so special for her. And just to be sitting in the same room and here's Mosey the dog. And here's Sarah, and here, you're right. And I was like, Sarah, you're taller than I thought. All of those things. It just was so, and here's the room, here's the room where you sit when you record. It was just so,
here's my view with the desk and all of that. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And for you to get to know my family.
Now I feel like I'm missing something where I don't know what the room you're in is like recording. So at some point, I suppose
Minnesota.
we'll have to remedy that. Yeah.
Minnesota, baby, come on out.
Okay.
You are always welcome. Yes. Yeah. So we had this wonderful evening together with all the family. And then the next day you took us on the most epic adventure. And I just have to, for caregivers who are listening, you just all need a Justin in your life. Because you know how it is, when you're traveling with someone who's chronically ill and you just don't know, is the path going to be too long? Is it going to be too steep? Is it going to be, how long is it? In our house, we have a thing called the Breininger rule, which is that you can't wait till you're tired to decide you're going to turn around, because by then it's too late. So you have to decide when you're halfway tired. But I didn't have to think about any of that on the day that you took us on an adventure, because you had it all planned out. And I knew that wherever we stopped, that it was going to be a reasonable amount of energy would be needed. And we had chairs and we had all the things, and you had talked about shade, and you had just thought up through all the things. And that just made that day of the trip so much easier for me, because I knew that you had thought it all through. Plus we got to see the most beautiful, we were at Mount Baker, so we got to see everything we saw was just, I don't have words. Yeah. It was is it really, am I seeing this? Is this real?
And that, where I took you up there's a highway that goes way up by this mountain, and there's, we went and saw a waterfall and the river along the way, and some other spots, some beautiful lakes with reflections of mountains and things like that. That's always been an area of where I'm from that I just love and I'm always drawn to. And so it was an area I'm familiar with. And so it wasn't I needed to do an enormous amount of research to figure out how to make this all work. But it was, there was some legwork to I wanted to go to every spot beforehand and kind of this is what make sure it felt right. But to see the excitement and just joy on you and your family's faces, as you're seeing these things that I think are just some of the most beautiful things in the world, to places to be, and just be facilitating that for you all, just was a really uplifting, special moment. And now when I'm back up there, the memories of, taking your family around up there, those are kind of now tied into those locations a little bit. So it's when I'm back at those spots, it's I remember when I was there with you all. And so, it was just a really special day with you all. And so it's one I'm going to remember for a long time.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, we had a
Yeah.
10-day trip full of highlights, but everyone
Yeah.
said that day was the highlight because it was just so like beautiful, but then also just
Mhm.
beautiful to have you as our
Mhm.
tour guide and, to have thought through all of those things.
Mhm.
Tell them about like when we took the very first stop, which was not the most scenic of all of stops, but we didn't know that at the time, and how the excitement of the Breiningers.
Oh, yeah. So it was just a short trail along the river. There was a very not long after we left the cabin where you were at. And it's a beautiful spot. The river's nice. And there's kind of you get to a point, there's a view of like a hill with kind of some like rocky kind of looking peaks or something on the top. And you were all just like blown away by the beauty of like that and the like taking pictures and like not like it's a gorgeous view, like not to discount that. But I was like in that
Right.
moment, I was like, okay, today is going to be good because if they're this
Yeah.
excited about like the first stop and where we're at and we haven't gotten to like the snow covered peaks and all of that,
Right.
like it's going to be a good day. So that
It's
was,
going to be a good day. And it
that's
was a
when
good day.
hmm
Yeah. The squealing did, some, get a little lower as the day went on, even though the views got more beautiful, just
hmm
because like the energy level went down.
right.
But
Yeah.
even though the squeals were quieter, the
hmm
excitement was still there. And I
For
was,
sure.
all my screensavers on everything now are pictures from that day because it just
hmm
is like, it's a beautiful state. And then you and I got to sit, I remember you like, I don't know, at one point years ago sent me a card with a beer on the cover and said,
hmm
someday we'll have this beer. And so we
uh-huh.
got to sit on the deck and have a beer,
Yeah.
like real people sitting next to
Uh-huh.
each other.
Yeah. Like old friends.
Yes.
So
Yes. It was good. It was good for my soul.
good. So obviously taking a 10-day trip, you haven't done that in a while.
No.
Even if you haven't done it in a while, it's not something you do every day.
Nope.
So like what was that experience like as a caregiver navigating like you want to do this trip, have these special memories with your family, have this like adventure, but knowing that you have to still be a caregiver through all of that. You have to take
Mhm.
considerations into account on how much and what kinds of things you can do.
Mhm.
Like I remember a couple days before you were coming over, you had to, you were doing things like asking, is there going to be a place for Sean to lie down? Like you're thinking of
Mhm.
all of these kinds of situations and how to kind of mitigate things
Yeah.
throughout. So like, can you talk a little bit about
Yeah, for sure.
that
Yeah.
side of this?
Yeah. So when we thought through the itinerary, because it was a pretty gutsy itinerary.
Yeah.
But we're like, how often are we going to get to this part of the country? So we got to do the
hmm
things, but we also have to survive. And so I think
hmm
as we built out the itinerary, we really thought about like, okay, if we're going to do this thing in the morning, then nothing else happens the rest of the day, you
Right.
know?
hmm
So I think we planned that kind of stuff in advance
hmm
and also sort of had a rule with the four of us is like, if somebody wakes up one day and there's something on the schedule and you aren't up for doing it, that is okay.
Yeah.
You don't have to do it.
hmm
And come to think of it, I don't think that ever ended up happening, that anybody
Mm.
stayed home from anything, which is kind of remarkable.
Yeah.
But so I think preemptively, we
hmm
did that in our planning of like, looked at the days and okay, like the first day was like a super intense travel day.
hmm
So the next day, we're not doing anything till like 2 p.m.,
Right.
And so kind of mapped that out
hmm
and set some ground rules about things like, you know, people get to say what they need and people get to stay
hmm
home and people get to whatever. I asked Sean about like needing a wheelchair for the airport and he said
Yeah.
no. But on the way home,
hmm
going through the Seattle airport, he was like, ugh, which was too bad because then it was a moment
hmm
where it was like, shoot, like he really did
Yeah.
need a wheelchair. But then at that point, it was like impossible to figure out, where one was and how we could get one and
hmm
all of that stuff. So that was something we sort of tried to preemptively do, but
Just a quick side note,
yeah,
in those
please.
moments, I just wondered, like, do you feel like you should have advocated a little bit more,
Mm,
like to like Sean, we really should just go ahead and have a wheelchair, or how do you? Because I know I've had situations where we've gotten into a point where like we should have done X, but Sarah
right.
had thought maybe we don't need to, and it's like, should I have pushed more or not? And
Yeah.
I think that's one of those balances that's tricky as a caregiver to how much do we like let the person we're caring for make their own decisions, which as
Right.
independent people, they
Right.
should have that autonomy,
Right.
but like we also want to have we're also like in this mode of watching out for them.
Yeah. That's a really good question. I think that I'm in that moment. I felt This is going to sound terrible, but I think I felt a little more of like, well, we asked and you said no, right? Which is not a very kind thing. But I don't think I so much felt like, oh, Allison, you should have pushed for this.
Right.
I think that, we're going on another trip to the Fanconi Anemia Research Fund meeting in a couple of weeks. And I think that having this experience, now I'm going to push for it.
Right.
You know what I mean? Having seen it. But I think in that moment, it wasn't so much just like, oh, shoot, I should have pushed for it. It was more like, ugh,
Right. And I think there's a sense of like, I think you could get into a point where it's like you're blaming yourself for like, I should have done something more. And I think that's the wrong, probably approach as a caregiver to a mindset to get into in that moment. Maybe it's a like, okay, next time, maybe we can have a little bit more of a discussion and you can, as a caregiver, I can express why, like, this, I think this might be important. And ultimately, like, you're understanding that the person you're caring for is an independent person and is making their own decisions and like respecting that too.
And I think it just highlights the moment of being on, right?
Yeah.
The vigilance of like, okay, the four of us are trying to navigate this big, busy airport. And then I look back and I can see that he's like slowing down. And so then I stop and I'm like, you okay? And he's like, well, my hip hurts. And so then I have to decide in that moment, are there wheelchairs? Is there a wheelchair? Is that easier? Like, is it easier to just keep walking?
Right.
Or to stop and figure this out? So then I saw a lady with a wheelchair. And I was like, can I get that wheelchair? And she's like, are you on Delta? And I said, no. And she's like, no, these are Delta wheelchairs, And so it's things like that where it's just like the constant decision making that has to happen. In a moment like that. And actually, he and I were just talking about that, about moments where, because he's a 9, we've talked about this, he's a peacemaker. So he's also not one to say, hey, I need something.
Right. Yeah.
Which I feel like then I'm on alert to be watching for that need and to advocate. And so I was saying to him, it would be helpful to me if you said, I need the thing. And he said, well, I often don't realize I need the thing until it's too late.
Yeah.
So I think that's tricky. And so I think that throughout the trip, like we went to the Chihuly Museum in Seattle, which was gorgeous, just gorgeous. But I had done some research beforehand just to see, like, is it flat? Is it, are there benches? Like that kind of thing, again, which is like not the thing that most people would have to do. Right. But that was the kind of research I was doing. Is it all in the sun? Like all of that. And I had seen that it said there are wheelchairs, first come, first serve, wheelchairs available. So when we got there, like 5 minutes in, and I could sort of see the lay of the land, I said, I think they said there are wheelchairs. Do you want me to go find one? And even then he was like, ugh. But at that point I was just like, I'm going.
Yeah.
But I mean, it changes things, right? Like it was an interesting experience to watch people see him in a wheelchair.
Right.
People sort of like moved out of the way, or then they kind of look at the whole family differently, or so it's interesting. And I think that that's a hard thing about when you said they're an adult and we need to let them make their decisions. But being in a wheelchair, it changes a lot of things, in both ways. And so I wouldn't want to like push that on a person.
Yeah, right.
But also it just, I think he was able to much more enjoy that day because he could sit, Yeah. So I think that like throughout the trip, there were moments like that of it's just the vigilance piece, I think, of like, how you doing? I mean, and even at your house, unfortunately, the night we were at your house for dinner, he was not feeling great. He was white as a ghost, and so I had to say, like, would you like to go lie down? I know they have a place where you can lie down. And I think that's, that feels disappointing to me because I feel like you all didn't get to see, Sean at his best, like you did the next day a bit more, but Sarah and her mom didn't. And so it's sort of like, oh, so then there's that piece too of like, I'm enjoying the conversation, but I'm also like, oh shoot, like he's there and is he okay? And he's clearly not feeling well. And should I be doing something different? Should we go home? There's just I think it just brings back the like constant vigilance of like, which is why my nervous system is like, But you had, I think it was one of the days when we were still on our trip, you texted me and said, oh my gosh, we just went to the state fair, or was it the county fair?
County fair. Yeah.
So like, what was that like?
Yeah. So we live in a small town and the fairgrounds are in our town. So it's like,
we drove past them.
Right. It's like 10 minutes away. So it's not like this was a distance wise a bit large trip, but the fair was in town, it was going on, and we haven't been to it in a while because I think we've done it once when Sarah's been sick a few years ago, but it's it's a lot of walking, there's a lot of people, it's just a big things. But I think it was Friday, and she was like, hey, I'm feeling pretty good, I think we should go to the fair, like I have the energy. She had a birthday coming up the next week, which we can talk about as well because we did a lot that day. And she's like, I don't know if I'm going to have enough energy after that because I'll be recovering from that day. So I think this is the day that makes sense. And like, that wasn't something that even that morning was on my radar. And I know that, like, I think I've talked about, like, I historically am not always super great about like, here's a new thing. This is not part of the plan that we had, but like, let's go do this big thing, like right now.
Yes.
And I've gotten better at that, but I was nervous just from I don't know, like still COVID and like lots of crowds of people, and and we gotta, like, it's not just once you get there, it's like parking is a whole thing. Like, so you gotta park and then you gotta walk there. And so what we ended up doing is I dropped her off kind of by the entrance, went and parked myself, walked back to the entrance where she was. We went in, we got some dinner, we went and we played a couple carnival games. And then she was like, let's go on the Ferris wheel. And we kind of like, I walked over and kind of, there wasn't much of a line. I got the tickets for it. She walked over and we did that. And it was just this like beautiful moment of like, here's a super like normalish couple thing. And like, it's, up high and, we can see the mountains and we can see kind of the town and just, I don't know, it was really cool. And then after that, she was already starting to fade a little bit and it was a bit of a walk. And so we walked back, we got some dessert and headed out. And, it was, so we were there for maybe I don't even think we were there for an hour and a half, maybe a little over an hour. And, I got the car and picked her up again and she was pretty tired after that. And it had been pretty stressful for me. Just like my anxiety was up, like from the moment we like were approaching it, like with, just because there's so many people and like not, I don't know, part of it is there's a COVID piece there, but part of it is just, I haven't been around and in large groups of people for a long time. And there's just a lot going on. And it's like, how far are we walking? How far have we walked? And do we need, so like when we were going to play some carnival games, like she waited by the games. I made the trek to the ticket booth to get tickets and then came back and trying to like manage that. So she doesn't have to do as much. She waited while I went and ordered the food and then I came back to the table. So we made it work and it was manageable and we did it for a brief window of time. But yeah, it's like you don't get to just have these spur of the moment carefree, like let's do this thing and then just fully be present and enjoy it. Like there's always that part of you that's like watching and your nervous system is kind of up, like scanning for, the person next to us is coughing a lot. Let's move over, all that kind of stuff. And just, when should we be turning around and back and all of that stuff.
Well, and it strikes me that, so let's say if Sarah was, perfectly healthy, you still had some anxiety about going to that just because it's a big crowd.
Yeah. Right.
But that it's sort of like and tell me if I'm wrong, I don't want to assume, but that your needs don't always get to be met in that way. Like let's pretend if she was perfectly healthy, she might be able to be like, okay, how are you feeling? And how are you? But you've got your own needs, right? About feeling anxious about all that. And then you've got these other things stacked on top. And it's just like double whammy of like, your feelings as a human coupled with your feelings as a caregiver.
Right.
In this intense moment.
Yeah. I think she's pretty good, or she's very good about like knowing and respecting and understanding like my anxiety and my apprehension and things like that for these types of situations.
Yeah.
So she wasn't like, we are doing this like, like, I don't care how you feel about it.
Right.
Like it's not that at all. And I think from my side, and this is something that I think entirely comes internally from myself, there's this feeling of needing to put, like, if she wants to do something, I have to set
Mm-hmm.
aside,
Mm-hmm.
like, regardless of how I feel about it, like,
Mm-hmm.
we have to do it. And I think that that's a place where probably I can do better at, like, knowing that I can advocate for myself and, like, well, I don't know that this is best for me.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, we can have those discussions.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, it was, it wasn't that, like, I was on board with going because it's important to get outside the house and, like, still live life,
Yeah. Yeah.
because with her being sick, we just don't get out that much and don't get to, like, have these moments.
Mm-hmm.
But I can do that, and I can have, and just learning that, like, my anxiety around going there and my apprehension, like, that can exist alongside of also having a great time with her. And, like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't have to be stuck in one or the other. It's not
Mm-hmm.
like a binary thing.
Mm-hmm.
But even, like, something that is on our mind as we're doing this, which is, it's kind of wild that this is, like, has to be part of it, is, like, when we tell people that we did this, like,
Mm.
how do we communicate that this doesn't mean that she's, like,
Yeah.
getting better?
Totally.
And it's like, oh, you're doing so much better, so you were able to do this.
Yes.
It's like, no,
Yes. Right.
this is a calculated risk or something that we took,
Yeah.
where we know that, like, and she was wiped out the next
Yeah.
day from just this brief
Yep.
thing at the fair, like,
Yep.
just out. And people don't see that piece of it.
Totally. Oh, I
Um,
100%. I mean, we just took
yeah,
a 10-day trip.
right. I can't
You know,
imagine
people are
the
like,
toll
"That's
that took on.
amazing."
Yeah.
They're like, "Oh, that's so great." You know, what's so funny is that one follower commented on the picture of you and me and said, "Sean looks so great and healthy." Didn't break it to her that was the
Right.
wrong bearded man. But I think for sure people are like, "Wow, look what he did," you know?
Mhm.
And it's like, yes, and like, I
Mhm.
didn't post all the pictures of him sleeping
Yeah.
in between all of these activities, you know,
Mhm.
like, so yes, we could do that. And that doesn't mean that, like, ta-da, you
Mhm.
know, which is, it's hard. It's like, I just
Yeah.
saw someone the other day on, like, a social media person who was grieving, but said the thing I'm nervous about telling you as a community that I'm grieving is I worry that if I tell you something funny or
Mhm.
share something delightful that's happening, you're going to be like, what's wrong with you? You're supposed to be grieving.
Or think that you're done grieving now, like,
Right.
you're done with that process. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Right. Exactly.
We just, like, it needs to be okay for us to experience the range of emotions. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we think those things swing back and forth, or they can exist in the same space. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if you're grieving, you can't also, like, you can laugh at something as well. Like,
Right.
those are
Right.
mutually exclusive, and
Right.
that can be confusing if you're in it too,
Mm-hmm.
as well. But yeah, that's,
Well, even like, so my mom, you know, who's the avid listener to the podcast,
yeah.
after our dinner at your house was like, Sarah, she was up and she was
Uh-huh.
moving and she was talking and she was a
Mhm.
hostess. And she's like,
Mhm.
if I hadn't listened to your podcast, I wouldn't have known anything
Right.
was going on. And I sort of felt like I needed to defend and be like, well, yes. And this was a huge deal.
Mhm.
Like I'm a huge deal, you know, and
Mhm.
I kept thinking that, like, oh my gosh, the energy that it must be taking her
Mhm.
to be here with us, you know, and so, but I found myself, and it's not that my mom doesn't understand, but I found myself sort
Mhm.
of even jumping to that to
Yeah.
be like, no, don't think that this one snapshot means that, like, everything's fine. You know, it means that, like, yes, she put all this energy into this evening and that there's probably a price that she's going to have to pay for
Mhm.
that. Like, she's probably going to be really tired
Yeah.
for a while
And, like,
afterwards.
to make that happen, like, she set this beautiful table. That's one of the things
Yes.
she's so good at. Like, she set that table 2 days before, you
Yeah.
know?
Right.
So, like, leading up to, I mean, I don't want to say just, but, like, leading up to just having friends over for dinner.
Yeah.
Like, that's a week-long process that we go
sure.
through. That's like, okay, what are the things that need to happen
Yeah.
for this day? And, like,
Yeah.
okay, what can we do 5 days out? What can we do 4 days out?
Yeah.
Like, let's make sure the day before, like, neither of us have too much to do so that we can
Right.
both, like, rest beforehand.
Right.
What can we take off the calendar the
Exactly.
day or two following
Yeah.
so that Sarah can get some rest afterwards?
Yes.
Like, it's a whole planning thing to kind of, like, to
Yeah.
pull all that off. And it's like, yeah, she can run on adrenaline for,
Mhm.
for that time. And, like, and I'm glad that she can have the energy to be present and like there and just her delightful self
Mm-hmm.
for that evening. But like, yeah, that comes at a cost.
For
Yeah.
sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you are so preaching to the choir right now because I feel like we have
Yeah.
a really busy like 4 weeks coming up.
Mm,
We're doing these negative space launch parties
right.
and we're going to Austin for the Fanconi anemia thing. There's just
Mm-hmm.
a lot going on. And that's exactly how I'm thinking is like for both of us,
Right.
like what do we need to do in the days before that and the days after that? And what do we need to
Mm-hmm.
take off the calendar? How are we going to get through all of those? Is he going to have a chair? Like, and so it's like, as I'm thinking about these parties, I'm not just thinking about like, what is my role
Mm-hmm.
as the, founder of this nonprofit, but it's also what are all the ways I can make sure that he's going to be okay
Right.
during this party and before the
Mm-hmm.
party and after the party. So again, it's like what we were talking about with you at the fair. It's this double layer of
Mm-hmm.
I already have lots of feelings about these events going into them,
Mm-hmm.
just my own human self. But then you add the caregiver feelings and worries and responsibilities on top of it. And I'm carrying
Mm-hmm.
twice as much, which is like, oh, that's
Right.
why I'm tired.
So as we're talking about this, like what I'm not hearing a lot of is like we're talking about what we do to kind of prepare in the time before and like making sure a person gets rest and like making sure that they have what they need during the event and after. But like, what do you do to prepare like for yourself to have
Mhm.
space like before a big event to like do for yourself to help you be present in that event and like
Mhm.
afterwards, like is that something that you feel like you have a good handle on, or is it something where that's often not like at the forefront?
Yeah. No, I mean, that's something I'm actively working on.
Uh-huh.
So there's a thing that my therapist talks about is there's coping ahead anxiously and coping ahead positively.
Huh.
So you can guess which one I'm super good at.
Yeah. Coping ahead anxiously. Yeah.
So like for the trip, like
Yeah.
I was nervous about the airplane. Just because I hadn't flown in like 3 years or whatever.
Yeah.
And so she was like, okay, let's think ahead
Mm-hmm.
to that flight. And let's
Yeah.
think about like, what might you feel? What might you need? What might you, whatever. And then like literally think about like what you can put in your bag
Mm-hmm.
that you can have prepared.
Mm.
And it was super helpful. I was like, okay, if I, need this, I'm going to have this in my bag. If I'm going to, and I thought of like physical items.
Mm-hmm.
Like I got new earbuds so that I could listen to meditation. I'm going to download
Right.
this plaything. I'm going to,
Mm-hmm.
have this medicine. I'm going to have this piece of gum, this water bottle,
Mm-hmm.
and so literally like thinking about like, okay, like doing like a dress rehearsal in your brain
Mm-hmm.
of sitting on the airplane and
Yep.
picturing, okay, this thing came up. What am I going to do? Oh, I'm going to do this thing,
Mm-hmm.
this. And so you sort of got like
Yeah.
rehearse
That's
it.
real smart.
It was really smart. And then she's like, now really like literally pack your bag.
Mm-hmm.
Like the earlier the better. And so I did like
Mhm.
days before the trip. So it was like
Yeah.
anything that pops up, I got something in that bag.
Great.
And so same thing she was saying to me yesterday about these parties is like,
Mhm.
okay, clearly you've coped ahead anxiously.
Mhm.
So what can you do to cope ahead positively to think about,
Mhm.
okay, if this happens, then what? And if this happens, what? And so it's super helpful because I think otherwise I just get this sort of fuzzy picture of terrible
Mhm.
things happening in my brain.
Yeah.
But instead, if you get a clear movie
Mhm.
of how it, and so the other thing she says is like, what if it all goes well? Huh.
Yeah.
Imagine that, right?
Right.
And so, and playing that movie. And I think that, I mean, even the fact that we had this trip, like, it's a downright miracle that we had a 10-day trip where really
Yeah.
there were like very few glitches.
Mhm.
That's amazing. And so it sort
Yeah.
of feels like a tally in the other column, you know,
Yeah. It's a real
of all,
win.
it's a real win. And so to be like, oh, because like we just have so many tallies in the other column of like,
Yeah.
remember that time when that thing happened? So to have a
Mhm.
thing to be like, hey, we did this thing and actually it all went okay. In
Mhm.
fact, it was great,
Yeah.
is a thing. And so I'm trying to think as I think about this next 4 weeks in my life that are going to be really busy.
Mhm.
I'm trying to think about, it kind of goes back to what we talked about with Megan that day about appointments and about how
Right.
we can cushion the time around the appointment. Right. And
Mhm.
so what can I do in this month in the times when I'm not at an event, I'm not at a trip, I'm not at a party to cushion, to rest for myself, to have him
Mhm.
rest, to be doing the things that the toolkit I've been building for myself
Mhm.
of yoga and meditation and acupuncture and all these things to like really like take uber good care of myself
Mhm.
in those off moments.
Yeah.
So that I can be more present, in those moments. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So the other big thing that we had another big event that I kind of alluded to. So Sarah turned 40. I guess it was last week.
Yeah.
Last week, Tuesday, which was, she was so excited to be turning 40. Like, just to like, she's really on board with like this being a time of her life to like just embrace. And like, this is when you like really know who you are and can really just like lean into that. There's a word she has for it, middle sense or something, is like that period in your life. I don't remember exactly how that's defined, but so she was very excited about this. And so she had very much a plan for how she wanted that day to go. Like we're doing at 10 in the morning, we were going to get pannekoeken, which are these like big Dutch pancakes. It's kind of somewhere between a pancake and a crepe. They have like crispy edges. There's a restaurant in town. Linden is a not all Dutch town, but Linden has a number of Dutch people, leans into its Dutch heritage. We've got some windmills.
We saw the windmills. Yep.
That's why they're here. These pancakes. So she wanted, to get those takeout, and us and her parents have those at 10 for breakfast. We had candles on her pancake.
Nice.
Which was fun. And then I think it was like at 2:00, we went to Bellingham to go to the cat cafe.
Nice.
And she had maybe like 6 of her friends and some of their kids.
Wow.
She invited as well. And it was 45 minutes there. So it wasn't like a big time commitment. So we did that. And she had a great time chatting with her friends. The cats were a little sleepy, but that's okay. You can't complain. They're cute. And then we picked up a cake and went home, had a little bit of downtime, had like a meat and cheese plate that we had picked up at a local restaurant out on the deck for like a little dinner with just the 2 of us, which was really wonderful. And then at 7, my parents came over, and then the 6 of us had cake on the deck. And so it was like, that's a lot.
It's a lot
for her, especially to start that early in the day. And we did, part of it is there's space in between everything.
Yeah.
Nothing was a super long thing. So there was some like, we can do this thing and then you can rest a little bit. We can do this thing and you can rest a little bit. And like the thing with her friends was not it was limited to like the 45 minutes window that we had reserved the cat cafe for, which if you've never been to an animal cafe, it's wonderful. It's delightful.
Yeah.
I would go sometimes back when I was working in the office. Occasionally I would go on my lunch break and just get a cup of coffee, read, and like sit next to a cat. This was before we had Mosey. So now I get a little bit more of that fix at home too.
Yes.
But, we did that. Dinner with the 2 of us was in at home, easy, got takeout, got some champagne to make it kind of feel special.
Yeah.
Or to make it feel special, not kind of special. And then, we had the cake. And so it was a beautiful day. She got to have this vision, and we, made it happen pretty much to a T. And like, I will say that when she has plans like that, I do. And again, I think this comes from myself. This isn't coming from her, but like, I really want to make sure, like, I feel a lot of pressure to like, make it all happen to make her vision a reality.
Yeah.
And so like, I know for me, I had some anxiety going into that day, just partially from like wanting to make sure that everything went off without a hitch and was a memorable day. And also like, that's a lot of activity.
That's a lot.
And how is that going to go? And again, like the couple days after that, she was wiped out.
Yeah.
Like that was a lot for her. And, for someone like her, where part of her ME is that, there's that disproportionate crash to activity. Like it's detrimental for her to do that much like on a regular basis. But like there are times when, she can make that decision that like this is worth what's going to come.
Right.
And so like when she does make that decision and like has that, like, this is important enough that I like know the crash is worth it. Like that's when I really want to be able to make that work out for her.
Yeah. Because when we were there at your house, she was telling us this agenda that was going to happen.
Yeah. Right.
And I, as not her wife, was nervous. I was like, whoa, that's a lot. things,
Yeah.
and I didn't say that out. Maybe I did say it out loud. I can't remember, but I just think, so, you said that you try to make that happen, but I mean, for you, like when you hear that kind of thing and she's like, and then we're going to do this and we're going to do this and we're going to do this, or even when she's like, let's go to the fair, what goes through your mind as the caregiver about like, oh man, like about what that's going to mean for you, about that day, about the days after, when you hear when she has a request or when she has ideas, about things like that. What does that bring up for you?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing that I think of is like, what's going to happen, what the days are going to be like post event.
Yeah.
And kind of, I think probably then, having that discussion, like this is, we know that you're going to crash after this, like, making sure we're on the same page that like, yes, that's going to happen. It's worth it to me, that's going to happen. And so if, I had any reservations, I can bring them up there, but just kind of, I think it's important to just have that initial discussion and make sure that like we're both on board with the thing. And, here it's like, this is a milestone birthday, like whatever she wants, I'm going to make happen for her on that day. But there is that, like, I don't know. I think part of it is just I guess it's grief or something adjacent to that, where knowing that she can't even have a birthday where she does the exact thing she wants on her birthday without a significant cost. I think that is another piece that comes up, is just like, why does it, I don't know, why does it have to be that way? Yeah. And like wishing things didn't have to always, that calculus between, is spending a Friday afternoon, evening at the fair, is that worth a like physically being wiped out for 2 days? Like, why does that have to be decisions that we have to be making?
I know.
And that sucks.
It does. It really does. I think even when you were talking about the fair and you're like, all the decisions you had to make about, okay, I'll drop her off at the door or at the thing, and then I'll park, and then she'll wait here, and then we'll go here. And I just thought, because that's my life as well.
Yeah.
And that's not what most youngish couples' lives are like.
Yeah.
And I think that even, I don't want to speak for you, but I'll say for myself that there is some loneliness in that, to be constantly thinking and constantly saying, okay, I'm going to drop you at the door, and then I'm going to go here and and to not be in this sort of together, but to have, I mean, we are in it together, but you know what I mean? To have this, like, I'm going to do these extra steps, or we're going to do this to make sure, like, this is not what the other couples are doing.
Right.
They get to walk hand in hand from the car that's really far away to the place. They get to go get the tickets together.
And you're seeing them out around you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just carefree. Yeah.
Yep. And that's not our reality. And that's hard. It's really, really hard.
Yeah.
We had this weekend, we were in a rehearsal for a wedding, and then in the wedding, which was a lot for us. And the day of the rehearsal, Sean was feeling real rough. And I said, you don't have to go to the rehearsal. Like, I'll just go. I'll figure out where we have to walk. But he's like, but I want to go. Like, I think it's going to be really fun. I was like, well, it is going to be fun.
Yeah.
But, and so he went, but I mean, and then we just made sure, like, here's a chair and here's a whatever. And even like, as people were coming in, like, I saw people like greeting him, and I found myself saying, like, you go to him. Like, don't get up and come to you. Like, you go to him. And, he sat the whole time, and all of that. And so the same thing, like, it felt, at the end, it was like everyone was going to the brewery afterwards. And I was like, yeah, there's no way we're not going to the brewery. And even the car was just like 3 houses down, but I was like, I'm going to go with the car, and I'll bring it to the driveway. And, there's a loneliness in that. And I think that people could see, like, everybody else is standing up, and here's this youngish guy is like sitting in a chair throughout this whole thing. And to be like, oh, we're different. And we know that. But I think that when we have been just in our houses for 2 years, you don't see it quite as much. But I think the more that we're out in the world, at the fair, at the wedding, at the trip, at the whatever, you start to see that and realize that, like, there are things that we are doing or taking on, or there are things that we're not able to do, or there are things that we have to consider that other people don't, and that's hard.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know for me that loneliness can certainly extend into that period after the event when Sarah
Yeah.
is, needing to rest all day and
Yeah.
isn't up and able to like just be there to chat.
Yeah.
Just, as we're passing each other in the house kind of thing even. And so like that can be a really like lonely space. It's certainly better being here living with her parents such that
Hmm.
like before it would be like, well, now it just feels like I'm alone in the house
Right.
kind of sense. And so it can be this really weird space of like I remember this after, you visited, is like it was this such like high from, meeting you and your
Hmm.
family and
Hmm.
having this great day in the mountains and like wanting to just hold on to that feeling, but
Yeah.
also the feeling at the same time of like, I came back from the mountains and Sarah was still pretty wiped out from everything, and
Hmm.
like you're right back into being a caregiver,
Right.
and like you want to hang on to this like great feeling for as long as possible, but
Hmm.
also like that's not how feelings work. Like
Right.
those fade as well. Just like, on the flip side, when you're feeling super anxious, like it's helpful to know that that feeling is
Right.
not gonna be permanent.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like also those great moments, like those feelings, you can't stay there all the time either.
Yeah.
And that's, I don't know, I always struggle with that after these events where it's
Yeah.
like, even though like whether it's the fair, whether it's Sarah's birthday, like yes, there's stress, yes, there's like trying to always be vigilant as a caregiver, but like often there's still like really great moments amongst
Yeah.
that. And like this, you come back from that and it's like we did this thing together and like
Yeah.
it was beautiful. And then it's like bang, right back to reality.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it's just I struggle with that transition.
Yeah.
There's just this like rebound afterwards.
Hmm. Because it's not just like, oh, that was a fun Sunday and now I have to go back to work on Monday. It's not just that transition. It's the like
Hmm.
knockout that happens to
Hmm.
our person.
Yeah.
I found that on our trip that I was so glad for so many reasons that my mom was there because
Hmm.
in between activities, Sean was sleeping,
Right.
and Maya's a
Yeah.
teenager. So she was
Hmm.
off doing her thing. And it is. I mean, and I feel like that even in our house sometimes, like
Hmm.
she's off in a room and he's sleeping and I'm like, here I am.
Hmm.
And so to have another adult there
Yeah.
to chat with and to hang
Hmm.
out with, I was like, oh, this is a really different experience than it would have been
Right.
otherwise. Like there would have been a lot of alone time
Hmm.
in between those activities when he was
Yeah.
sleeping. And I think I get that. And, part of the fun of fun things is reliving them,
Hmm. Yeah.
you know,
Hmm.
and is the next day and saying, remember that? And remember,
Hmm.
wasn't this fun? And like when that doesn't really get to happen because the person's just like got to rest, you kind of
Hmm.
miss out on that.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. It's striking me how these are just like everyday experiences, you know,
Yeah. Hmm.
weddings and fairs and birthdays and trips. And I mean, those are special experiences, right?
Hmm.
But just everyday experiences and how layered they are for people like you and
Yeah.
for me.
Well, they're everyday experiences, but also there's a like they don't necessarily happen at the same frequency for us.
Yes.
So
Hmm.
like there's a sense too that like this thing happened, it was great, but it might be a while before we have another one of those.
Yeah.
You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
There's that kind of like, yeah, they're what are commonplace to a lot of other people, but not necessarily
Yeah.
for us or at the same frequency.
Right. Right. I'm trying to think, a lot of times we talk about supporters and I'm trying to think how that relates today. I think
Yeah.
one thing might be, and you did this so beautifully because you get it, is
Hmm.
that, when we came to your house and a couple days beforehand, when I said, could there be a quiet space for Sean? You're like, already on it,
Hmm.
you know? So I think that's one thing to think about or even when we went to this wedding, they sent an email out a couple days later and said, we just want to acknowledge that for some of you, that was like the largest space you've been in for a couple of
Hmm.
years. And we just want to thank you for doing that. And so I think that kind of thing, like if you're a host or you're a hostess, just recognizing like what it maybe has taken
Yeah.
for the person and the people to be there. Like
Hmm.
what can you do while they're there to make it
Hmm.
easier and smoother to just acknowledge, like I tried to do a number of times with you and Sarah, just to say like, I really can picture what it took for
Yeah.
you to host us. and recognize that that probably took a lot of time and energy, and it will, and you'll be paying the price later, and so I think just having that awareness that like you invite people over for dinner, and if it's people with a chronic illness, that's a different thing, for them to show up. And so to try to make it easier and smoother and to acknowledge that.
Yeah. And I think if you're in that situation, like you can certainly, like, not everybody maybe can anticipate some of the things that is going to be needed. And so certainly asking, is there anything that I can do to help make so-and-so more comfortable, or, do they need a place to lie down? Like, what can I do to help make this an easier experience for them?
Yep.
Is something to think about there. I think about what you said when you were at that rehearsal, like you were having people come up to Sean, like think about just being like that, like go to people. Don't just, that's a simple thing, but kind of just understand that there's people, these people are people, have limited energy, and think about how you can interact and spend time with them while helping them save as much energy as possible.
Yeah. And I think even, some of our favorite people were at this wedding, and so they totally get it. But so they were able to be like, they could tell that he was, struggling. And so one was like, I'm going to go find some water. And another one was like, I'm going to sit here with you, or I'm going to, like, and then to me, it was like, oh, thank you. Like, cause that vigilance we talked about, it was like other people were being vigilant. Like somebody was like, oh, some snacks were out, I'm going to bring some for Sean. And I was like, oh, I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one who's like watching and problem solving right now. And so if there's any of those things that you can do to step in.
Well, and also if you can step in and like sit with Sarah, Sean, whoever, like maybe that gives the caregiver like a moment to walk and have a conversation with someone and have a little bit of time where they can, not that we will just immediately let everything, all that stuff fall away, but like that we can also be present and enjoy the event as well. Yeah.
So when I would see Sean sitting there by himself, I'd be like, oh, I got to get back over there. But if I was like, oh, Ben is sitting there with Sean, I was like, oh, great. Well, then I'll go talk to this person, Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think just the other piece, the one last thing for supporters is just to remember that often with people who are ill, sick, chronically ill, like, yes, they're out. Yes, you're seeing them, like how you saw Sarah at her best. Like, know that there's a cost to that. That's not what every day is like. That there's two sides to that coin, and just if you can acknowledge that, and like, I know that this is going to be, the next days are going to be rough for you, but I really appreciate getting to spend this time with you. That means a lot. That to me, like, and to the caregiver too, like. I know that as a caregiver, like these events have a lot that puts a lot in your mind, and you've got a lot that you're thinking about, and just I really appreciate that you were able to come. Yeah. And just acknowledge the ways that it is difficult for the caregiver, for the person that they're caring for. Yep. Goes a long way to feel seen and understood, and that you're just not the average person, navigating these seemingly typical life experiences. Yep.
And I think even real quick to say, like to understand, like if we're like, yep, it's time for us to go, to not be like, what? It's early or whatever. Just to be like, no, it's okay. Great. Thanks so much for being here. You know what I mean? Yep. And to know that none of that is personal, and, all of that. Yeah. Yeah.
Good.
Okay. Well, it's not as much fun as sitting on a deck with a beer and a mountain, but it's still really good to talk to you.
It's always great.
Oh, thanks for the conversation. We'll talk to you soon. Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. Bye.
Bye. You've been listening to In Sickness. Find us online at insickness.care or on Instagram at insicknesspodcast. You can send your questions and comments to insicknesspodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend or fellow caregiver, or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening, and take care.